It was 2 a.m. when I woke up to the sound of knocking at the front door. At first, I thought I was dreaming. My husband was out of town on a business trip, so it was just me and my 2 young kids in the house. We lived in a quiet, suburban neighborhood, not the kind of place where you'd expect trouble, but something about the sound of that knock felt wrong. I got out of bed, grabbed my phone, and made my way to the front door. I didn't open it, just peered through the peephole. Nothing. The porch light illuminated an empty front step. Maybe it was a prank. I went back to bed trying to shake off the unease. 20 minutes later, the knocking came again. This time, it was louder and more deliberate. My heart started pounding. I looked through the peephole again. Still no one there. I turned on the porch light, thinking maybe it would scare off whoever was doing this. As I walked back toward my room, I noticed something odd. The back porch light was now on, even though I hadn't turned it on. I froze. My phone was in my hand, so I called the police. I explained what was happening and that I was home alone with 2 kids. They assured me someone would be dispatched immediately. While I waited, I went to check the back door. The backyard was dark, but the faint glow of the porch light illuminated something I hadn't noticed before. Weirdly, I noticed a package sitting on the steps. It was small and wrapped in plain brown paper. I didn't remember ordering anything at all, to be honest, and the sight of it there, especially in the middle of the night, made me want to shit in my pants. I backed away from the door and called out, "Who's there? The police are on their way." Silence. Then, from somewhere in the shadows, I heard a man's voice. "You forgot your delivery." The voice was calm, almost casual, but it sent a wave of terror through me. I ran back to the living room and grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it tightly as I stayed near my kids' room. The knocking started again, this time on the back door. The police finally arrived 10 minutes later, their flashing lights illuminating the neighborhood. I told them everything, about the knocking, the voice, and the package. One officer cautiously approached the back porch and inspected the package while the other swept the property. Inside it was an old, dirty doll with its eyes scratched out. Tucked into its clothes was a note that read, "You left the door unlocked last time, ma'am." My stomach dropped. The officer patrolling the yard found a makeshift ladder propped against my children's bedroom window and footprints leading from the shed to the back gate. The officers asked if I'd noticed anything unusual in recent weeks. That's when I remembered a delivery truck had been parked near our house several times recently, but no packages had been delivered. I had brushed it off, thinking it was for a neighbor. The police couldn't definitively tie it to anyone, but they promised to patrol the area for the next few nights. I didn't wait around to see if anything else would happen. The next day, I packed up my kids and went to stay with my sister. A few weeks later, we moved out of that house. I still wonder who that man was, how long he'd been watching us, and what would have happened if I hadn't locked the back door that night. It's actually crazy how people still act like this in this modern society. I'm just happy my kids were safe, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure if I would ever speak on this, but when the time comes, I would. I'm Maya, a 25-year-old woman with a petite build, standing at 5 feet 3 inches. At the time of this story, I was living in Chicago, working remotely as a graphic designer. After a bad breakup, I had just moved into a shared apartment with 2 roommates. The building wasn't glamorous, but it was in a decent part of the city, with a coffee shop downstairs and a park nearby. The apartment was old, with creaky wooden floors and doors that didn't always latch properly. My room was cozy, with large windows overlooking the street. My favorite thing about it was the lock on my door, a necessity when living with strangers. My 2 roommates were Maria and James. Maria was a nurse who worked night shifts, and James was a quiet, slightly awkward guy who worked at a tech startup. He kept to himself and was rarely home, which was fine by me because I'm not that type of extrovert girl. The first couple of weeks were uneventful. I spent my time working, decorating my room, and exploring the neighborhood. James was polite but distant, while Maria was warm and chatty, though we didn't see each other often due to her schedule. One Friday night, I decided to stay in and watch movies. Maria was working, and James had mentioned he'd be out late with friends. I locked my bedroom door, made popcorn, and settled in for a quiet evening. Around 11 p.m., I heard the front door creak open. Thinking James was home, I didn't pay much attention, but then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps moving through the apartment. They didn't sound like James's usual hurried pace. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. My heart raced. I muted the movie and listened intently. After a few moments, I heard the faint sound of breathing. "James," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. I grabbed my phone and texted James. "Are you home?" The reply came almost immediately. "No, still out." "Why?" My stomach dropped. I didn't dare make a sound. I sat frozen on my bed, clutching my phone. Then the doorknob rattled. "Who's there?" I yelled, trying to sound brave, even though my entire body was shaking. The rattling stopped, and after a few seconds, I heard the footsteps retreat down the hall. I waited for what felt like an eternity before creeping to the door and pressing my ear against it. The apartment was silent. The next morning, I brought it up with James and Maria. James seemed genuinely confused and said he hadn't been home. Maria shrugged it off, suggesting it could have been a neighbor or someone mistaking our apartment for theirs. But things only got stranger. Over the next week, I started noticing small signs that someone had been in my room while I was out. A drawer left slightly open, a notebook moved from its usual spot, and my blanket folded differently on the bed. At first, I thought I might be imagining it, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger. One night, I woke up to the sound of my closet door creaking open. My blood ran cold. I sat up and stared at the darkened doorway, barely able to breathe. I could feel someone there, though I couldn't see them. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam illuminated the closet, empty. But as I moved the light, I noticed a faint scuff mark on the inside of the closet door, as if it had been opened and closed repeatedly. The next day, I decided to confront James. He seemed startled when I asked if he'd been in my room. "No," he said, looking genuinely confused. "Why would I do that?" Maria overheard and joined the conversation, expressing concern. We decided to install a small camera in the living room and hallway for security. That night, I set the camera up and locked my bedroom door as usual. Around 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a faint clicking sound, like someone trying to pick a lock. My heart pounded as I grabbed my phone and watched the camera feed. To my horror, I saw a figure standing in the hallway outside my room. It wasn't James or Maria. The person was dressed in dark clothes, their face obscured. They held what looked like a set of lock-picking tools. I dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher as I stayed hidden in my room. The police arrived within minutes, but by the time they got there, the intruder was gone. When the officers reviewed the footage, they noticed something chilling. The person had entered the apartment using a key. It turned out the building's previous tenant, who had been evicted months ago, still had a copy of the key. He had been sneaking into the apartment late at night, watching us and even moving items around to unsettle us. I can only hope he doesn't have any of my adult photos of me. The man was arrested a few days later after trying to break into another apartment in the building. He had a history of stalking and burglary, and the police found a notebook in his possession detailing his observations of us. I moved out shortly after the incident, and for goodness sakes, give me a break. How are people still doing this? To this day, I make sure to always double-check all locks and never assume I'm alone, even in my own home. Please stay safe, everyone, and trust your instincts. You never know who might be watching. I bought a small vacation cabin in a remote mountain area about 3 months ago. It's simple, 2 rooms, a kitchen, and a living space. I got it for a steal, which I thought was due to its secluded location. It seemed like the perfect escape from the city. The surrounding property was vast, with woods and a private trail leading to a small lake. The first time I went there, I took my best friend Jake to help me set up. We spent the day cleaning, unpacking, and grilling. That evening, as we were sitting on the porch, we noticed a man walking down the trail toward the lake. He didn't wave or acknowledge us, just trudged by with his head down. "Who's that?" Jake asked. I shrugged. "Maybe a local. I'll check it out later," I said, not wanting to overthink it. The next weekend, I decided to go back alone to settle in. I was looking forward to the peace and quiet, but almost immediately the place felt off. When I unlocked the door, I noticed muddy footprints on the wooden floor leading into the living area. My stomach dropped. I knew I hadn't left them there. I checked the windows. They were all locked. I convinced myself it must have been Jake tracking dirt in, though the thought didn't sit right. That night, I was watching a movie on my laptop when I heard crunching outside, like someone walking on the gravel driveway. My heart raced as I turned off the lights and peeked through the curtains. I didn't see anyone at first, but the longer I stared, the more I realized someone was standing just out of the porch light's reach, near the edge of the woods. They weren't moving. I closed the curtains, locked all the doors, and stayed in my room for the rest of the night. I convinced myself it was probably just a hiker cutting through. The next day, I decided to explore the trail to the lake. About halfway down the path, I noticed something weird. Several small, rusted traps were scattered along the trail, hidden beneath leaves. They weren't set, but it still gave me a bad feeling. When I reached the lake, there were fresh ashes from a fire pit. Someone had been camping there recently. I started to think maybe I wasn't as alone as I had hoped. When I got back to the cabin, I found a bundle of sticks tied together in a strange shape on my porch. It was like something out of a horror movie. I immediately called Jake, who laughed it off and told me I was overthinking things. That night, I locked all the windows and double-checked the doors. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of something banging against the side of the cabin. It was loud, deliberate, and sent chills through me. I stayed in bed, too terrified to move, until it stopped about 15 minutes later. The next morning, I found deep scratches gouged into the wooden siding of the cabin. I decided I'd had enough. I packed my things ready to leave, but before I got in my car, I noticed something stuck under my windshield wiper, a folded piece of paper. It read, "Stay out." I drove straight back to the city and didn't return for 2 weeks. When I finally did, I brought Jake with me. I needed to figure out what was going on and decide if I should sell the place. We spent the day securing the property. Jake thought I was being paranoid, but I knew something wasn't right. That night, around 2 a.m., we were woken up by the sound of someone hammering. It wasn't coming from the front porch. It was coming from the back of the cabin. Jake grabbed a flashlight and cautiously opened the back door, calling out, "Who's there?" The beam of the flashlight revealed something chilling. Several wooden boards had been nailed over the back door. Someone had been trying to seal us inside. We didn't wait to find out who it was. We grabbed our bags and bolted to the car. As we were pulling out of the driveway, the beam of the headlights briefly lit up the woods near the cabin, and we saw him. The man from the lake trail was standing there, holding a hammer in one hand and a bundle of sticks in the other. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were locked on us. I reported everything to the police, but when they investigated, they found no evidence of anyone on the property. No traps, no boards, no bundles of sticks. They chalked it up to local pranks or paranoia. I sold the cabin a month later and never went back. But I always wonder, if we hadn't woken up, what was his plan for us? It's honestly crazy to think about. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood where not much happens. But about 6 months ago, a new neighbor moved into the house across the street. At first, I didn't think much of it. People come and go all the time. What was strange, though, was how little anyone actually saw him. No moving trucks, no furniture, deliveries, just a small car in the driveway one day. One evening, while I was watering my lawn, I caught my first glimpse of some guy. He was tall, thin, and dressed in gray sweatpants. He didn't wave or make eye contact, just hurried inside his house carrying what looked like a large duffel bag. I didn't think much of it, but I couldn't help but notice that his blinds were always closed, even during the day. Come to think of it, I believe that guy was the new neighbor I was referring to earlier. About a week later, I came home late from work and noticed something odd. His house was completely dark, but his car was still in the driveway. I thought he might have been away, but around midnight, I saw a flickering light through one of the windows, like the glow of a flashlight. Curious but not wanting to be intrusive, I went back to bed. The next morning, I mentioned it to my neighbor, Ryan, who lives next door to him. Ryan said he hadn't seen much of the guy either, but mentioned something unsettling. He'd heard loud scraping noises coming from the house late at night. It was almost like someone was dragging furniture or something heavy across the floor. Over the next few weeks, things only got weirder. One night, while taking out the trash, I noticed the new neighbor standing in his driveway, staring at my house. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, motionless. When he realized I had noticed him, he quickly turned around awkwardly and walked back inside. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but come on, man. What the hell? Another happened again. One night, things escalated. Around 4:50 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of someone knocking, softly at first, then louder, on my front door. When I went to check, no one was there. I brushed it off as a prank until it happened again the next night. This time, the knocking came from the door at the side of my apartment. I called Ryan the next day, and we decided to keep an eye on the house together. A couple of nights later, we heard a strange noise coming from the neighbor's garage, a faint, rhythmic banging sound. Ryan grabbed a flashlight, and we crept over to his property. As we got closer, the banging stopped. We peeked through the small window of the garage and saw something that made my stomach turn. A large plastic tarp draped over what looked like a table, with something bulky underneath it. Ryan and I exchanged a look, and we decided it was time to call the police. They arrived quickly, and after we explained everything, they knocked on the neighbor's door. No one answered. They checked the garage and found it locked. With no immediate cause for entry, they told us to keep an eye out and call them if anything else happened. A few days later, the car was gone, and the house appeared abandoned. Ryan and I decided to let it go until we saw something horrifying a week later. While mowing his lawn, Ryan noticed what looked like a freshly dug patch of dirt in the neighbor's backyard. He called me over, and we couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We called the police again, and this time they brought a warrant. What they found left us both shaken. Buried in the backyard was a collection of personal items, wallets, phones, and even a few pieces of jewelry that didn't belong to anyone in the neighborhood. The items were traced back to several people who had been reported missing over the past year. I couldn't even believe my eyes when I saw that. The police are still investigating, though, and the neighbor hasn't been seen since. Ryan and I can't stop wondering how close we came to becoming his next targets. And to be honest, I'm just really thanking God that I luckily avoided all this. It's terrifying to think someone like that could live right across the street. You got to keep your eyes open these days.